Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Electric word, life, it means forever, and that's a mighty long time, but I'm here to tell you there's something else. This past Thursday, the world lost an incredible talent, a musical virtuoso, a true artist in every sense of the word, both icon and iconoclast. It's not my intention this morning to completely pivot away from my prepared sermon to honor the man known simply as Prince. But as I spent the past few days listening again to his music, reflecting on the impact and influence he had on me growing up, the impact and influence that he exerted on the entire music industry and on pop culture, as I pored over his lyrics, as I read the stories and anecdotes, I realized that a brief tribute to this man would in no way detract from our corporate worship this morning. In fact, I believe that it will greatly enhance it. He was a gifted musician who played 27 different instruments. On many of his early recordings, he played every instrument on every track, but that's not what truly set Prince apart. That's not what makes him worthy of our attention this morning. To say that Prince was ahead of his time is an understatement of epic scale. Prince was a revolutionary who refused to allow himself to be defined by others. He epitomized the concept of self-definition. His career, his artistry transcended race, genre, and gender. And in finding success, while refusing to be boxed into narrow categories defined by others, he helped break down barriers for artists who would follow in his footsteps for the next 3 decades. It's easy to forget now in 2016 that back in the late 70s, the music industry was still racially segregated. Producers and record labels routinely stuffed black artists into a niche sometimes referred to as the urban genre. But Prince's music did not fit in the urban genre. It could not be contained in any single genre. His music was a seamless synthesis, a syncretic creation fusing rock, soul, R&B, pop, and funk. Prince's music appealed to people across genres and across racial demographics. And so from the beginning, Prince, a black artist, wrestled with his record label, demanding that they treat him like a true pop artist so that he could have the same freedoms, the same marketing opportunities, the same marketing budget that other white artists had. But Prince wasn't just a genre bender. Like other music stars before and after him, Prince blurred the lines of gender binaries, an incredibly timely issue here in 2016. Prince's art, in many ways, was a commentary and critique on traditional societal gender norms. On Thursday, journalist Alyssa Rosenberg penned the following tweet about the loss of both Prince and David Bowie this year. "We've lost 2 artists who acted as reminders that there's no one right way to be a man." Only now, following his death, are we learning just what an incredibly generous philanthropist Prince was in life. We are discovering now that he anonymously donated substantial sums of money to several important charities and causes, including Black Lives Matter. Over the past few years, he secretly gave financial support directly to the families of both Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't note that Prince's songs were just plain sexy. Prince was a sexual revolutionary, especially in the early 1980s. His lyrics didn't just push the envelope, they bumped and grinded that envelope. Back in the 80s, Tipper Gore bought a Prince album for her then 11-year-old daughter, and she was so shocked at the sexually explicit lyrics, she went on to found the Parents Music Resource Center, which lobbied Congress and compelled the music industry to print warning labels on albums. You've probably all seen these labels, the black and white ones that read parental advisory, explicit content. Those stickers exist because of Prince. For the record, so to speak, I absolutely agree that Prince's music, especially his early music, is not really appropriate for youngsters, but I think it is important to note that Prince's views on sexuality were far ahead of his time. Through his music, Prince preached a pro-sex gospel that was more often than not also incredibly pro-feminist. His songs from the late 70s and early 80s often depict women as powerful, in control of their bodies, in control of their sexual decisions. And in this regard, Prince's outlook on human sexuality is much in line with the view taken by the UU Human Sexuality Curriculum, Our Whole Lives, a course that we proudly teach here at UUCJ. And finally, although Prince's music was deeply sexual, it was also deeply spiritual. Prince had no difficulty sliding back and forth between the flesh and the spirit. His songs are replete with beautiful and complex religious symbolism. I could choose any number of examples from his discography, but to get us a bit closer to the theme of our actual sermon today, I'll choose what is perhaps Prince's most famous song, Purple Rain. In many ways, this is a very simple song. The speaker sings of his regret about the end of a relationship. The first verse goes like this: I never meant to cause you any sorrow. I never meant to cause you any pain. I only wanted one time to see you laughing. I only wanted to see you laughing in the purple rain. It's straightforward enough. The only mystery is, why did Prince choose the symbolic imagery of purple rain? Prince had a predilection for the color purple, as many of us know, but not just because of that color's association with gender fluidity. Many of us Prince fans know that Prince also had a fascination with the apocalypse. It's a theme that recurs in many of his songs. Prince himself once said that his interest in the color purple was connected to the Christian belief that at the end of days, in the end times, there will be a multitude of signs and miracles, including blood in the heavens. That red blood, mixed and mingled with the blue sky, would result in purple rain. So in this song, Prince poetically compares the end of a relationship to the end of the world. Probably all of us have had to end a relationship once that felt like it was the end of the world. But there's more to the symbol of purple than just that. In just about every medium of art, rain, for obvious reasons, represents baptism. And baptism itself represents death, burial, and resurrection. When you're watching a movie, and in the movie, if it starts to rain, pay attention. The director is telling you that something very significant is happening. You see, it's very difficult for filmmakers to shoot a rain scene, so they're not just doing it for fun. Rain is a deeply meaningful symbol of transition, transformation, death, and/or rebirth. Prince's Purple Rain signals the death, the apocalyptic end of a relationship, but it also suggests the possibility of something new on the horizon. In the third verse, the speaker says, "Honey, I know times are changing. It's time we all reach out for something new." That means you too. In the Christian mythos, the apocalypse is followed by an ageless epoch of unprecedented peace, light, and life, a new heaven and a new earth. So too, the speaker in this song suggests there is something new waiting for both himself and his former companion, but only if they are willing to reach out and take it, if they are willing to accept the transformation that this purple rain heralds. For just as purple is the color of both beginnings and endings, the color of both sunset and sunrise, rain is a symbol of death and rebirth. Prince's use of rain and baptism, of water as a sacred symbol, that brings us to the original focus of my sermon for today, wells. As I mentioned earlier this morning, last week my family and I returned to my hometown of Hutchinson, Kansas to attend the memorial service of my grandmother who passed away last December. Hutchinson's a fairly small town. It had been several years since I had last visited. But while we were driving down one of the major streets, Sonny saw a house on the side of the road, and in front of the house was a sign. And on that sign was a flaming chalice, It was a Unitarian Universalist fellowship. We were shocked. This was not there the last time I visited. Of course, we were very pleased as well, so we made it a point to worship with this group of UUs on Sunday morning just before we would be flying back to Jacksonville. They are a lovely group, the Hutchinson UUs. They're small, but they've existed in some fashion or form since the 1880s. Their roots are of the Universalist tradition, whereas ours here in Jacksonville are of the Unitarian. Anyway, Sunday morning for their sermon, we watched part of a documentary that contained a series of interviews with leaders of diverse faith traditions from the West, from the East, from Africa, all around the block, you name it. It was a thoughtful video that contained several topics. They interviewed faith leaders. They were both knowledgeable and wise. And one segment of the video focused on what I sometimes refer to as the paradox of the one and the many. The individual faith leaders each spoke about the similarities, the commonalities, the harmonies that they saw existing in every major world religion. The implication was that each faith tradition at its core shared similar values, shared similar goals. Their words suggested and even implied that quite possibly all religions, even agnostic or atheistic religions, are all driving ultimately toward the same divine source, and that many of the differences between religions today are superficial or semantic. This somewhat utopic, universalistic view was balanced by the recognition of the faith leaders that there are still, nevertheless, very real, very substantive differences between faith traditions that ought not be swept under the rug. A recognition that diverse religious traditions and religious practices are not completely interchangeable. This recognition produced a warning, a caution, to beware the temptation of picking and choosing at random spiritual practices from various faiths and mixing them together to create personal designer cocktail religions. Following the service, I and the UUs of Hutchinson, Kansas did what Unitarian Universalists all across the country like to do. We talked. When I was invited to share my thoughts, I focused on this segment of the film that I just described to you, and I related how it reminded me of a piece of metaphoric advice that I once heard and has stuck with me for a very long time, a truth that I always keep in the back of my mind, especially when I'm contemplating Unitarian Universalism. In the desert, a thirsty man should dig one deep well, not 10 shallow ones. In applying this metaphor to religion and spirituality, I connected the dots. I suggested the thirsty man is any human thirsty to find ultimate meaning, ultimate connection to something greater than himself or herself. Each well represents a different faith tradition, a different spiritual path. The key to finding water, then, is sticking to one well and digging deep. Flittering back and forth between multiple wells with minimal, superficial digging will ultimately yield nothing. In the end, water will never be tapped, and you will end up even thirstier than when you started. Before I could connect the final dot, one of the members of the UU Fellowship jumped in and did it for me. She pointed out that we Unitarian Universalists, in our freedom to search for truth and meaning, with our openness to import and appropriate the wisdom and practices of so many other religions across the globe, we UUs might be accused of behaving like the man who digs 10 shallow wells in the desert. If Unitarian Universalism becomes merely a clearinghouse of world religions that we treat like different liquors at a bar for us to mix into a cocktail, or different foods at a buffet table for us to pile into a single nasty sandwich, then paradoxically, our thirst will never be quenched, our hunger will never be sated. Now, I've not been able to independently verify this statistic, but it sounds quite plausible, so I'm going to share it with you this morning. A UU minister once relayed to me that the average lifespan of a Unitarian Universalist is only 4 to 5 years. In other words, not counting children born into the religion, the average convert to Unitarian Universalism stays in the faith for only 4 to 5 years. Why is that? Is it because their thirst and hunger for meaning and connection were never satisfied? Is it because we as a faith have sacrificed spiritual depth for breadth? As we prepare to conclude our worship this morning, I'm going to give you some homework. I used to be a teacher. I have 3 questions that I would like you to consider this week, 3 questions I want you to wrestle with, to discuss with others, to ruminate upon in your quiet spaces. Now, these 3 questions are predicated on an assumption, a given, kind of like a math theorem. So here's the given. Given that Unitarian Universalism is a well unto itself and not a collection of 10 shallow wells. That is, given that Unitarian Universalism is a unique faith tradition, just like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism, 1, what is it specifically that makes us a single well instead of several? 2, if we are a single well, how do we dig our well deep? And 3, perhaps most importantly, what exactly is the water that we are trying to reach? I'm going to repeat those for you. I see some people taking notes. 1, what is it specifically that makes us a single well instead of several? 2, if we are a single well, how do we dig our well deep? And finally, what exactly is the water that we are all trying to reach? Why are these questions important? Because these are the core questions we must be able to answer if we, as a congregation, as a faith, are going to define ourselves. Answering these questions provides us an opportunity to engage in a subversive act of self-definition. Just as Prince refused to allow others to define him as an artist, we ought not allow others to define who we are as a church and as a faith. Let us instead take up that responsibility for ourselves. And just as Prince was able to take inspiration from multiple genres and styles of music to create a distinctive, beautiful, self-defined music all his own, let us continue to draw inspiration from our religious sources and use them to respectfully and conscientiously create a distinctive, beautiful, self-defined faith that will lead us to our deep waters. Blessed be.